Hey everyone, welcome back to the Meta Modern Meaning podcast. Today, we're going to start something a little different. I'm joined by Layman Pascal, one of my most beloved interlocutors and collaborators in this space, to do something, with a bit of ongoing depth that hopefully will become a series of conversations as I've gotten to know Layman better over the past couple of years and check in with him here and there. Usually I would say something like, "How you doing, Layman?" And he'd say something like, "Well, increasingly, generally always really good, but swell, I guess," or something to that effect. And as time went by, it would be, "How you doing, Layman? How's your day going?" "Oh, well, given my general background condition of, just assumed blissful happiness. Things are feeling good." And this started to become increasingly salient to me as I picked up on this as a very fascinating aspect that seemed to be a baseline condition for Layman's condition over time of feeling really, really good. And of course, maybe that shouldn't be too surprising because Layman is an ongoing spiritual practitioner who's been dedicated to a life of spiritual practices that explore forms of integration and state practice. Um, but I also then noticed, this would become something that Layman himself would sort of start to speak about and get some reflection on from other people, and it seemed like there was a fascinating conversation to be had here. So at many many levels, and so that's just the bare bones of an introduction that I want to offer to this conversation that we'll kick this off with is what is the condition of Layman's condition, and what is that feeling like? Where did that come from? And what do we make of all that? I aspire to Layman's proficiency in a number of spiritual practices, and the fact that it seems to me anyway, and I'd love to get your thoughts about this, about your own condition, which will come to you in a second, that is the fruit of a life of spiritual practice, and to see what this means and what it feels like and what we can offer into the space that could be helpful to kind of bring out of your own experience. So that's the base framework I'm going to offer to this conversation, and what will hopefully become a couple of conversations as we probe into layman's phenomenology, I guess, basically. So welcome back, Layman, to the Metamodern Meaning podcast. How does that sound as a setup for this?
That sounds fantastic. We've just dropped in to see what condition my condition is in. I have a lot of uh, engaged vagaries around what it means to check one's condition. I think that can be a misleading orientation in general, but also it can be very functional. It's a, I think there is a developmental aspect to languaging it that can be useful to the individual, but always runs the risk of, you know, indelicacy and self-indulgence. Let's just talk about someone's condition. Now, there might be some interesting features of my condition, which I guess is the premise of this discussion. I don't want to undersell or exaggerate what those are. And I think overall, we need a much richer language for exploring these kinds of mutations and what their subcomponents might be. And they're certainly not homogenous. I think they're much more interesting than a lot of standard spiritual conversations have given them credit for. So
Mm.
I'm happy to talk.
Yeah, no, I'm really glad that you named all that. I'll also name that this is something that I instigated, and I think that that's also important. I'm so fascinated by, well, you as a person, but also the conversations that we've had around sort of, how are you feeling and what does that look like, and how that might relate to the practices that you are very intentional about relative to various somatic forms of integration, et cetera. So this was kind of an indulgence, I guess, for me, but I do think it will hopefully be a benefit for people as we explore this and fumble our way through. At least I'll probably be fumbling my way through trying to talk about this. But I think you named a couple of important aspects there, and because There are maybe more traditional ways people talk about state attainments and things like that, but that can veer into all sorts of really, I don't know, interesting to say the least, but sometimes very messy and even ugly kinds of ways that people wind up describing their status or their kind of, even talking about things as attainments has this kind of it brings with it a lot of baggage. And so one of the things I really value very much about what you're generally committed to is rethinking the language that we have, rethinking the categories that we use, and being really sensitive to all the other possibilities that might be out there to regularize this, to bring it into new registers, to different registers, and just generally explore and experiment with what is the ongoing human condition and its relationship to spirituality. So that's a lot of what I think our conversation is going to be getting into, using your phenomenology as sort of our touch point. So anyway, yeah, I'd be happy to say more to set this up a little bit, or I could, start to ask you some framing questions. But anything else you'd want to throw into this at this point?
I can appreciate why, from my point of view, people have used language like attainment. I think first it sets a good goal, and it has the ability. Sometimes it has like a marketing aspect to it, where you want to get people involved in this, and it might be good for them. Fantastic. It's also possible that I'm misled about my own condition. It's also possible that wherever I am and wherever I might be going is purely a genetic effect, right? Like, Layman, how did you grow your hair that color? I'm like, it might be unrelated to anything I thought I was doing along the way. I'm very interested in how much of anyone's progress is merely from the fact that they were doing things on purpose to try to make progress. Like, to what degree is intentional inner practice itself the generator of different unfolding outcomes,
Mm.
quite irrespective of the particular content of those practices, right? Is it 80% the intention and 20% the specific practices, or 20% intention and 80% the specific practices? So those are interesting areas that come up. But please feel free to probe my
Yeah,
phenomenology.
well, before we start considering abstract implications and ideas from all this, let's just start there. I mean, how are you feeling, Layman? Describe your current experience of this moment. You're in your general condition right now.
I have a very intense, smooth, pleasant, tingling sensation. That's not constant. That started a little while ago today. Um, I have a general thing that's been going on for me for um, on and off for a couple of years now, which is when I drop in to check my condition, there's a sense of what I might want to call prior satisfaction. There's a sense of a confirmation feeling. I sort of liken it to getting a wink or a thumbs up from yourself, as if yourself was another. So there's a sense of, uh, I mean, part of me wants to call it a security, right? In the sense that there might have been an existential insecurity that helped motivate my life, from which I both suffered and which helped clarify my journey and my practices. And there's a sense now that that thing is accomplished in some to some significant degree. But I'm very suspicious of a word like security, because it doesn't in any way make me invincible. And if somebody started pulling out chunks of my brain, I imagine it might vanish. So it doesn't actually make me secure, but it gives me a kind of security that's very hard to identify which category it comes from. It's not really mental or emotional or physical or circumstantial, right? I'm tempted to suggest that it belongs to a blended phenomenon that emerges from the interaction of these categories, and that's why it's so hard to put your finger on it. Um, so it's expansive, right? I always end up doing this with my hands. I'm trying to like sketch out where it is. It goes
Mm.
farther than where my hands go.
Mm.
Uh, it has a charm to it. For me, it's charming. There's a bit of a foldiness, a transparency, a phenomenological shimmeriness. Uh, there's a sense in which it's falls past itself. Sometimes I try to do a first, second, third person lens, and none of them really work properly. It's sort of like, yes, this is me, but there's a point at which me doesn't apply, and then you're like, oh, it's an other. The presence of the one is here. And then I check that, and I'm like, yeah, there's a point beyond which that doesn't apply. You're like, oh, it's just a phenomenon, but that doesn't fully encompass it either. So those sorts of lenses are kind of Mobius or Klein bottle wound into each other. Each one doesn't succeed and becomes supplemented by the other. So it's got a kind of, I don't know, there's a sort of translucent folded quality to it as well. And a general sense of, I used this phrase when we were talking in Vermont, generalized interiority, like a very distributed quality, as if like when you lay on a bed of needles, right? You don't get stabbed. One needle would stab you. A
Hmm.
million needles is just nice because it distributes. It feels like sort of the weight of being me is distributed to many points equally.
Hmm. That's interesting. So I want to keep doing that throughout because, I'm interested to hear more of this phenomenology. But again, I want to kind of dance around, and also because we are recording this, and I'm interested because I do think people will find this very interesting, and so I also want to try to take people along with us as well. So we'll keep coming back to some of these points, but one orienting question I want to throw in is, can you think back to a point when you would contrast your current condition with like and I guess there's a couple of questions bound up with that, and one of them is something like, was this a gradual process or was it sort of a sudden shift? But let's just start there with like, if you were to contrast how you feel now with you at an earlier point that you could maybe are inclined to use as sort of like a more of a baseline for what you would think of as sort of standard human phenomenology, what would you point to and how would you describe the differences?
Uh, when I look back, it looks like a series of loose phases, each one of which seems darker and smaller retrospectively from the next one. This sort of existential confirmation feeling is fairly new in the sense that I feel like it's a couple of years old in terms of just how salient it is, how much it stands forth. But it clearly, to me, has the an architecture that's shared to momentary epiphanies all along the way and to a basic intuition that I had. And so I could say, well, whatever this thing is, something happened to me in my late 20s. More of it was there after that than there had been when I was 19. So it seems to have been sneaking in for quite a while, as long as maybe I continued to do the right things. Um, Differences. There's an unforced buoyancy, I would say, that wasn't there before. And so both the feeling before was like I'm either falling or trying to find my ground or trying to figure out how to float. And now I'm just floating.
Unpack
So
that a little
there's
bit
a
more
there's
because
a there's a
yeah.
motivating uncertainty that used to be there a lot, like that could go in a number of different directions. Like either I'm going to succumb to the experience of being myself and a human being and being in this world, or I'm going to have to do something, brace myself, satisfy myself, morally transform myself, whatever it is, or find some secret state change or developmental process. That motivating feeling is gone.
Hmm.
And I liked it at the time, but in hindsight, it feels really bruised,
Hmm.
is probably how I felt before in comparison.
Now, okay, yeah, that's really I want to zoom in on that a bit because what you just said reminds me of some of the ways people articulate things um that they're sort of that they fall on a spectrum, and it seems to me they exist between sort of the profound and the really ridiculously mundane, right? So something like Eckhart Tolle, maybe I'm being one closer to the expression of one version of that, at least in the writings of just sort of like, yeah, just, you know, it's just the power of now and, stop striving, give up, or not give up, but, just like all of that needs to just go away. There's something kind of self abdicating about it. Sort of like the self disappears, the ego disappears, and you're just sort of in the moment and you're not striving, you're not clutching, there's something there. Um, and there's a version of what I'm hearing that sounds like that. But I've always kind of found those like a little simplistic and maybe self-defeating in some way. They seem to not be adequately expressing something because I'm always like, well, does that mean what? We just stop doing what trying and then I'll experience what I tend to experience if I just like sit on my couch and feel like I don't want to do anything. That's not, I don't think, what is being gotten at, but there's something else, and there's a kernel of a deep truth or insight there that sounds like you're getting at. So let's just start there. Like, how would you distinguish what you just said from, yeah, like a more mundane form of consciousness that's just like, nah, fuck it. You know what I mean?
I think the mode, like I said a moment ago, the motivation is different. Ah, fuck it, is there's a certain energy that makes you um interested in the relief that saying fuck it might bring. If you didn't have that feeling, then fuck it wouldn't be very interesting. I think there are misleading ways to phrase a lot of this, assuming that what's happening to me is in any way similar to what other people might write in books and speak about. The sense of like just abiding or no seeking, things like that. I think there's an important self insight that those things are pointing to, and an invitation to a certain kind of intentional metacognitive practice. But I think they're not objectively very good indicators. And that the people who speak to that certainly do not cease to be active and creative and very personally distinct in a lot of ways. So they're describing something which might be like putting one system out of gear and putting another one in gear, or maybe the thing they were looking at got big enough that it falls outside of their ability to inspect and evaluate it, so it seems like nothing, but it's moving them around now. uh to me, a
That's
lot
a
of
very
this goes to
powerful
the
image. I'd
yeah.
like to come back to that at some point, but I didn't mean to cut you off. Keep going. That's a
No,
beautiful
I mean,
framing.
that's a very important series of ponderings go down that pathway, I think. But a lot of this to me, um, a lot of the people I talked to and studied with and respected and read when I was younger were very focused on just presence, just being, the isness of things, the background of mind, the general, let's say, existential condition or the space between thoughts, the sort of trying to selectively privilege and hold oneself in the unforced condition of the contextuality, conscious contextuality. What is it to be? What is it just to be you now? And I was my conclusion across all these people was that that was at the heart of the practice, that they even indicated that it was superior to other forms of developmental attainment, that, those fools were just getting amazing states of consciousness, but we're abiding as we are. Okay, great. Um, and that's changed for me over time, the way I evaluate that. I've come to think that there's a real difference between practices where you try to hold the abiding, even in like a kind of unforced holding, practices where you move to and from the abiding or try to release yourself into the abiding. You're dealing with whatever degree of being you've got at the moment. Those are different from practices that seem to build up your degree of being. And if you build up your degree of being, it might start to become active in ways that look like that first one. But the things that describe what you're going through might not be good instructions for somebody else. Like there might be a missed step or two different kinds of processes involved, and they're hard to see the difference because they both kind of look invisible and have something to do with your general existential condition.
You speak about the role of intentional practice, almost potentially of any kind, in a sense, like a content neutral, but so long as it's intentional practice, maybe there's something just in the intentionality of certain practices that are efficacious. Um, and yeah, the state that potentially leads to is one of sort of effortless no striving. So what was that? How do you understand the relationship between those two of like when you sit down, you have a practice, you're working on your attention and your intention, and you're trying to hone that in some very, meaningful way. Is there then suddenly like a slip into now I just feel like it's easy or that it's disappeared or so yeah, explain or talk a little bit to that relationship if that makes sense.
I think the easiest part of thinking about it is the one that's traditionally called mastery, where or like uh post conventional levels of sophistication in any kind of task oriented developmental skill or intelligence. So you work on it, you work on it, you work on it, and then it seems like it's starting to go. So there is something like that involved, I think. But I have a sense that what the intentionality circuits of the human brain do is help to generate coordination between other systems. Because to do something on purpose, like when you watch a little kid, it moves around its arms and legs long before it can move its arms and legs around, right? It has the ability already. Intentionality is added to the system. The tentacles of intention have to grow into there somehow. And when they grow into there, the sign of that is those actions can be initiated in a way that's coordinated with other bodily activities and other relationships. So
Mhm.
there's an increase of capacity through an increase of coordination that comes with this intentionalizing. So I think to some degree, no matter what we intend, as long as we do things on purpose without burning ourselves out, that we increase the overall interconnectedness of our system. And as the interconnectedness of our system builds up, our subjective access to a sense of generalized interiority is amplified.
So let's come back now. And again, I'm just trying to be mindful of bringing people because you and I have been talking about some of this stuff for a while, but I'm in recording this conversation. I want to kind of, weave people into this a little bit gently. So having said all that now, let's come back to the phenomenology question again. Let's just, like check in again with your condition and your experience of the moment and say a little bit more about it now with some of that context of just, yeah, describe it, metaphorize it however you want a little bit further.
Okay, it's the quality of the tingles has changed and they've moved around. They're more on the back and there's a heat to them now. The this thing is less nebulous and more spherical, feels a little bit more definitive. Uh, there's a there's a sense of it wanting to do something, wanting to speak, right? Maybe the concept of intentionality enticed it in or something like that. One of the things I deal with a lot, and I do on purpose to some degree, is to try to think about what I'm going through the lens of maybe it's an entity, and maybe it's an entity that's not good. Maybe it's an alien invasion of me, right? That I should uh, keep myself alert, or at least put a little bit of distance between me and the experience by keeping dubious options of interpretation on the table.
Mm.
But there is this sense of like it and it if you ask it, it's like, no, I'm really you, you're not you, I'm you. And it's like, okay, but I'm going to call you it when I talk. um, there's something it wants, something it likes to do. There's topics it likes, there's
Mm.
an approach. It wants to chew certain foods, not others.
Uh-huh.
um and cheer like upwelling cheerfulness from about the solar plexus, like as if it was the top spout of a toroidal structure,
Mm.
and a little bit of a, I imagine it having a kind of golden light, golden coloration.
Mm. Yeah, some of the images that you're using are very like visually rich. Is there a visual component to this? Is it imaginal or is it yeah,
Um, I've had quite a few experiences that are visual, and that's on a spectrum from intimations to hypnagogic to you saw it with your eyes open.
mm,
They come and go, and how many of those actually apply to this? And then I would like group in the set of things that pertain to this phenomenon. I'm not totally sure. Right now, there's a there's a strong geometric suggestiveness. And in terms of my eyes, uh, yeah, like a scintillating fuzziness, maybe.
awesome. I appreciate that. I really also appreciate how embodied you are in grasping and feeling into this. So it's actually it's awesome. It's very beautiful. So okay. Gosh, where do I want to go? I mean, okay, so you brought up the itness of this in the relating to it as this sort of entity other aspect. Um, say more about that, how you feel in this. You also again mentioned that there's something that's sort of extended of you that maybe is moving you in directions. It's sort of it's like maybe you're a little bit beyond your own reach and it's sort of carrying you forward or something. So what's your relationship to this bigger aspect of you or it? Just I don't know, say more about that.
Yeah, one fairly convincing picture of it that I give to myself is like a of like having a little pearl in yourself and like expanding it and expanding it and expanding it. And then it gets to be pretty big. And you're like, whoa, this is something I got to focus on in my life. But then when it expands beyond you, you're like, well, where did it go then? I used to like check for it as one of my attributes, and now it's somewhere around. So the sense in which it's there and that the task, this is so hilarious and embarrassing to try to say these things.
Mhm.
Um, the the task once it's gotten bigger than you is to try to conform yourself to it, right? Like it's like, okay, there it is. It's hanging out now. And that puts me in this difficult position that you and I have discussed a little bit of, that I've been going through for a while, which is keep doing your practices because they're working, or stop doing them because they worked. And like I say, be pregnant with this thing, like let it
Mm,
gestate, let it do what it wants. What does it want? Mm, like maybe to retrain me. Like, can I walk up the stairs the way it wants, right? Can I let it lift my arm rather than me lifting my arm? And so there's something in the itness of it that facilitates those kind of relational moves where in the times where I'm sitting here and I'm like, this is just me, that can go to a really intense state experience. But I'm not sure it tells me very much about what the process's next unfolding looks like. So I think the unfolding is facilitated by a little bit of wiggle
mm,
room that the framing of it gives me that wiggle room.
mhm.
Also, the framing of the entity, right? And the entity is then something where I could go. Sometimes it's like, well, that's the presence. Like, there's the divine right there. And other times you're like, how do I know? Maybe it's a galactic alien who's come to possess human beings. So I love both of those because they're both so charming. Uh, there's a certain alien maliciousness I think that God has.
The what is it? The Mysterium Tremendum at Fascinans, the the terrible and fascinating mystery of
Yeah.
the numinous.
Yeah, there's always been. I had a vision one time in my 20s of being in a dark wood and God was like hunting me with a hatchet through the forest. It was very intense. And he was like eventually he got me and he like put the hatchet right there and I could feel it like wiggling in the stem of my nose. And then the wiggling was like, whoa, a classic universal buzzy noise sound.
Hmm. Hounded by God.
um,
I think there's a Is that a Gerard Manley Hopkins poem? Also, yeah, not the only person to have had a vision of yourself in a dark wood that led to some form of unia mystica. Well, I want to dig in a little bit more on this idea. So, have you experimented at all with sort of what happens when you let it kind of move you around and what your locus of autonomy is relative to it?
Yeah, it feels like an increase of autonomy, right? So, um, it seems like there's a utility to some of the old-fashioned, surrender and sacrifice and these sorts of. I think they describe a postural orientation, physically, emotionally, and mentally, that helps to some degree, but they don't seem to capture the whole picture. And obviously, they stray toward human interpersonal dynamics in a peculiar way. Uh, it's a great deal of fun. It's like uh, it's got like a toddler feel, like like, oh, this is gonna be a while. Like I'm not just gonna like
Mm,
walk. I'm
mm.
gonna fall down a lot. Uh, but like the more okay, so the thing, there's like a baseline contentment element to it. And then there's like a spaciousness of forms, and that has a certain uh positive neutral thing. Like, oh, I don't want to call it beingness or just some kind of positive neutral existential term. But then getting involved with it churns it over. It brings forward this uh specifically positive quality
Mm.
that was like lurking in there, like the lightning in the cloud or something like that. The uh, so trying to get involved in a way where I am agentially trying to conform myself to it, and it's claiming that it's already me doing that. But keeping that right balance feels like an increase of surrender and autonomy, but the overall effect is a heightening of the specifically delightful aspect of whatever this thing is.
Hmm. The image that's coming up for me is there seems to be a particular kind of trope in a lot of sci-fi films where a person is able, like they have this like armor suit and they like jump into the armor suit and then they're able to like operate these giant mechanical arms, and it's sort of like you see it in Avatar, you see it in like a Starcraft, sort of like the human in the giant mechanical suit that like gives them these new massive human powers. Seems like some kind of holographic version of that is sort of emanating out of you, that you're sort of like manipulating this new ethereal body that is somehow you but not you, an extension of you, a magnification of you but also something outside of you. How does any of that land for you as like a comparison?
I mean, it's a lot of fun, and I do have a. I mean, uh, the exoskeleton um, misses some things, like it
Mm,
misses the way um, some of the organic qualities and some of the sculpting qualities. Like in some
mm,
ways, it's reshaping and remaking me, which the exoskeleton doesn't necessarily do to the human occupant. But in the sense of like, yeah, trying to figure out how to work in this big new thing. I like that. I relate to that. And I think it's an important way to think about this because one of the tendencies is to immediately max out the cognitive discernment and go, well, whatever this thing is, it's God, it's infinite, it's forever, right? And you're
uh,
like, you don't know. It
mm,
might just be a little bit bigger than you.
mm,
Right. I always make this point about how you can drown in a few inches of water. Like it just has to cover you, and you'll be like, it's everywhere. It goes forever. Maybe it does, maybe it doesn't. You don't know. But it's at least a little bigger than you. It goes a little bigger than my perceptual and cognitive space. I don't know how big that means it is, and I
mm.
don't know that anyone would ever be in a position to say so. So it's fun to think of it as being just a next step of bigness
Yeah.
that massively exceeds this one in some interesting way, but isn't necessarily uh, homogeneously endless in all
Well,
directions.
and two questions come up around that. One is what is the spectrum of intensity in which this manifests? Like, I'm particularly interested in when you wake up in the morning, you're just like, oh yeah, that's right. I went to bed in my giant, spiritual suit, and here I'm waking up in it. Or is it something you've got to do some practices to kind of get it going and energized? How much does it fluctuate, expand, and grow, that sort of thing?
Uh, so there are things that make it more salient, and there are things that seem to be of service to it. And this also gets to the question of the difference between your condition and checking on your condition, which, like I was saying, I was kind of, let's say, raised to believe that my condition and checking on my condition was kind of the same thing. That I was only really aware when I was self-aware. I was only really here when I like checked that I was here, right? And that a lot of my practices in my early life were of that kind of a mindful quality. But uh, it feels now pretty strongly that there's a difference, that uh, it's doing its thing and I don't have to know about it necessarily. If I know, if the two things, if my conscious knowing and it happen to get lined up, and there are things that make it more or less lined up,
Mm,
it's not interested in that necessarily.
mm,
That's not, it doesn't live or die depending on whether I'm detecting it.
hmm,
Every time I check, it's there. And checking more causes something to happen. Talking about it, trying to do things with it,
mhm.
um, being sort of allowing it to blend between people or into the cause, these sorts of things. They do interesting things, but it doesn't seem like it's resting fundamentally on my knowledge of it. So I might get up, and if I step outside of that and go, does that feel different than when I got up some years ago? Yeah, it does. But that's only real for me when I check. Now,
Mm.
I do check, and I'm like, oh, yeah, there's that thing. Um, and so there is a little bit of it sort of pulling me around like an ox with a ring in its nose. And there are things that I'm going to say it wants me to do that enliven it as my condition or are of service to it. It claims not to need them, and maybe that's bullshit. Maybe it just wants me to think it's invincible. Um, but there's certainly um, general stability and lack of distraction makes it much more salient.
Mm,
Um, Discussing it and working with it makes it much more salient.
hmm.
Um, as its salience shows up, it does not seem to have been absent.
Mm,
Now, that's something that seems different. I think if things that might have been similar when I was younger would come, and it was like, oh, now I'm there, and the rest
mm,
of the time I'm not there.
mm.
So it's much more. There's a continuous thread feeling, at least retroactively
Yeah.
projected out of the
Yeah.
times in which its salience stands forth.
Yeah. That's really interesting. There's so many things that come up there, but I don't want to, just offer my glosses, but it's just really interesting in terms of it's well, I guess I will ask that question. Is there a sense then that you retrospectively can say it's always been there, but now you see what has always been there? Or is it something that has like really come online and you can tell the difference in like a important way?
There's a long journey of increase, but something subjectively feels like it has shifted in an important way. Now, always, I mean, as far back as my recollection goes, I could probably find some little version of it all the way back.
Mm,
But there's a point at which that seems irrelevant to do.
mhm,
And certainly, I don't want to take a position about whether it's something general and universal that
mm,
goes all the way
mhm.
back. Like, I don't know that that's a helpful thing to have an opinion about one way or another.
Are there, again, keeping this frame or lensing on it as an it that has some kind of valuations that are in some way in addition to your own, um, are there things that you feel that it wants that trouble you, or that ever feel like, ooh, that doesn't feel like a good direction to go? Is there a conflict that this brings out?
Not in that sense. It's not like it's like eat the pie. No, no.
Yeah, yeah.
Um, what there is a kind of apprehensiveness about what its further um, normalization might do. Like, I don't see any signs that would be problematic, but there's a certain way in which the kinds of evaluations I might want to make, I'm not sure beyond a certain point that I'll know whether it's making them or not.
Mm,
Um, so there are things where, like, we've talked about this a little bit too. There's things where a kind of a craziness feels like a risk, right? It
mm,
feels like, okay, if this were to happen much more, then I wouldn't necessarily be able to tell certain things that my uh, regular symbolic consciousness, social training, and human system rely on me being able to tell.
mm.
Now, it's not necessarily the case that I was always pulling those things off anyway. So it's not like I've got that much to lose, but there is a feeling, sometimes a feeling of a dangerous edge.
Mm,
Um, and it's not dangerous because something seems like, I don't know if I agree with that. It's dangerous because I don't know if I could tell
mm,
beyond that point.
hmm. Yeah, that seems like a really interesting thing to keep as a thing to keep coming back to. I mean, yeah, when we've spoken briefly about this in the past on this particular topic, like the issue of relevance realization, to use that kind of framing, kind of comes up for me because um, so much about how we adjudicate the good, the bad, what we should do, what we shouldn't do, comes from a framing of us as being a particular entity in a particular kind of way in a particular kind of space. And that's the whole thing. It's like that's, and my work is all about this. It's like that's meaning. But then if somehow you've expanded beyond that and that framing of it isn't really particularly the right framing anymore, at what point do you know what to do and how to act anymore in a way that, you know, at least from a one way of seeing things would be, the moral, ethical, right way of operating. And I think that this seems to be, or one could imagine that this confluence of issues has historically been a site of a lot of the messiness of various kinds of masters and gurus and figures who they've broken free of the shackles of reality and now they can go sleep, with all the 10-year-old children or whatever horrific things that humans would look at and say, oh, you're not supposed to do that, that's not okay. If you lose sight of relevance realization from the locus of a human being, terrible things can ensue. And so at the same time, though, if there's some expansion of that frame in a way that makes a distinction there, what is the healthy and optimal way of navigating the difference? And I think even just being aware of this locus of conflict is like really important because it seems like a lot of people have messed this up in the past because they're taking their first baby steps maybe in a very messy way and keep falling down. But there might be some intergenerational accretion of knowledge and experience that's building on itself of how to better optimally navigate these kinds of conflicts and being able to better integrate whatever it is that this extended being is with the human being in a way that doesn't necessarily lead to a lot of ethical carnage. So that seems to be something that is a really important site that is opened up by navigating these things and kind of and is actually, to be honest, like, when we were talking about doing a conversation around this, like this is important stuff that I feel like for the field, for general human knowledge, is like could be really beneficial. And there's not a lot, I can't think of any. You would know a lot better in terms of having read a lot of these kinds of literature before, but like I'm not aware of anyone taking the vulnerability and the self-awareness of turning back on themselves and hyper reflecting on their condition and exploring it in a open, often agnostic and very kind of expansive way that can allow these conversations to happen in a maximally beneficial way that people can benefit from in terms of knowledge and experience. And so that's a really that's a cool thing to be doing. But I just wanted to throw all that in the mix because a lot of the frameworks that we use in these spaces that help us talk about meaning and value and relevance and all these things seem to be precisely what in some ways gets expanded or pressed on or moved beyond or undermined or something as you potentially move into these new traits and states and modes of being, and how to navigate that best is the question before you. So I don't know, any thoughts about that?
So many thoughts about that. The volumetric model that Tom Murray has been building sort of plays with developmental accretion and a sort of ablation of deeper structures that we use for our sense making and symbolic identity. Right. And so one of the things he's looking at is, what happens with individuals and in communities if they let go of certain basic fundamental structures. So there's a sense in which they might become loose cannons, but I think that can be massaged a little bit because that same thing could make them extremely open to feedback, extremely open, right? They're like if there was uh, no or very little resistance to all kinds of other navigational information.
Hmm.
Um, and so that's one of the things. I think there is a way to steer that, and that we've generally not had a lot of conversations about that. Lineages have proposed that lineage habits and the intergenerational transmission of people who've gone before you is an important kind of anchoring thing to keep individuals from flying off the handle. I believe that to some degree, but it also hasn't prevented a lot of corrupt behavior within lineages, most of which we probably have not yet heard about and may
Hmm.
never hear about.
Hmm.
Um, Trust with other human beings, like sort of networks of feedback, ecological orientations, and a more clear idea about what are the mutual constraint elements of an ecology. To be more clear about that seems important.
Hmm.
Going slowly, I think, is important. Uh, I have found myself both obsessively oriented toward and deeply reluctant about extraordinary state change experiences. And I think there's a way in which people can uh, push forward too fast. And then they lose the ability to very slowly build up the infrastructure that would allow these
Hmm.
things to operate as a being in a world with beings.
Hmm.
I will say it's a strange thing to feel like rather than values, you're like, here's the value.
Hmm.
I'm
Hmm.
the value. I'm valuableness.
Hmm.
So, like, how do you then relate to values?
Hmm.
Now, a lot of values are problematic. So it's not like it's necessarily a bad thing. But there's a way in which I guess I would say I feel more like goodness is a great example. I feel like goodness and I are peers. So like I'm open to what goodness has to say,
Hmm.
but I don't think it's there's not a negation or a servitude. It's not like it's
Yeah.
this transcendental thing above. It's like here's my friend goodness. I'll check in with him because like him, I am a fundamental value.
Well, gosh, there's a lot to unpack
This is
there.
so ridiculous.
Yeah, there's a lot to get into there. I'd like to come back to some of that, but my first question related to all that is coming back to the phenomenology of the experience, what are the constraints? So to speak, right? However you want to conceive of that word, but like why does it want to taste and choose some food and not others? What is the gradient there of possibilities that it moves towards one and not others? What are the constraints?
um, Sort of like like which ones do I specifically find in my case, or what do I think? Uh, what kind of cosmos of constraints do I think might apply to these things in general?
No, I mean more in your experience of it, and less the abstract. I
Mm.
mean, feel free to get into the abstract based on your experience, but just as you move through the world with this, like what does it feel like moving you and it moving in one direction versus another? What's guiding it, if not some of these other things we're more familiar with?
It really likes when I sit down and do certain kinds of practices, which aren't necessarily the same as the practices that I suspect brought it forth.
Hmm.
Uh, I have found in my own case that it really likes uh, some kind of shamanic and philosophical presentation of itself, and it's really interested in the coherence of new kinds of cultural fields, right? Like it's the reason I'm in these spaces is because it likes that. Like it might be like, I the only thing I like is sitting in a mountain in India. We're like, well, fuck, I guess I gotta go do that then. Right. But that's not the message I get.
Hmm.
It's it, very ecological, very practice oriented. It wants an abnormal amount of stimulation conductivity, let's say, throughout my body. Right. The more I let it in control, you've seen this, the less I like really want to eat or things
Hmm.
like not because it's not doesn't want me nourished, but because it wants it's like it doesn't want my outsides or my insides distracted.
Hmm.
It wants to just run more through somehow.
Uh, on that front, the relationship between being a carnal, embodied, food eating animal and this, is that perceived by you as a tension, or how is that, yeah, how do you relate those? Because there's obviously, and this is a lot of what has attracted me to metamodern spirituality, are, there's a long history of this dualism between body versus spirit and this kind of thing. And I think that the attempt to sort of move beyond a simplistic dual frame there is an attractive option. um but it seems like some of the phenomenology that you're describing also could easily be mapped to some of that, but maybe there's a different way that you would frame that relationship.
There's a this generally satisfactory quality. You could lean in that direction and be like, it doesn't matter. I'll eat whatever I eat, and then I'll die. That's fine. And then there's this, hey, um, we can actually take this process further.
Mm,
And that means that there are emotional and ethical and physiological and maybe subtle ways to take it to a next degree of richness.
mm,
Um, and in that case, it's not um, there's no anti-carnal judgment at all,
mm,
but there's an awareness of mm, trans-carnal opportunity,
mhm,
right? So, and it's almost like you can't lose. Like you go, either you ate this delicious thing and you shut yourself down a little bit and it receded slightly into the background, or you didn't and it came forward, and that's great too.
mm,
So there's a kind of jubilant um, mutual confirmation between those
mhm,
possibilities. What seems to me, in some ways, is a journey that requires strength and precision to find the hybrids between those, right? The
mm,
certain kinds of physical activities, certain kinds of love making, certain kinds of food consumption, food preparation. Like it seems like there's a just right. You can get
mm,
it just right, and then both sides are really happy.
yeah.
Both sides can be like happy either way, or they can be happy together.
Uh-huh.
That seems to be ideal, but that requires a lot. It
Mm,
requires time if it's unfolding on its own pace, or it requires rigor if you want to like accelerate it more. But then
Yeah.
too much rigor seems to produce a counter spin at some point.
Yeah. That's really interesting because it does seem to then provide the affordance of a new opposition that themselves could be integrated and then enhance potentially the whole broad experience into a new register. I mean, the evolutionary angle to this is what is really one of the things that's very exciting to me because I think it marks it as a distinction between this and the opportunity of your experience relative to this broader field that you are actively engaged in the particular historical moment that we're in, et cetera, and some of the perennial tradition of, this has always been the way it is, and it's always this, and it doesn't change, and you found the thing. It's like there's another way of seeing that that's an evolving version of what has been and is an expression of that, and also is a new horizon that we're before, and that you in some ways are at that right at that the cusp of where the sun meets the ground of the horizon, or whatever metaphor to flesh out there. But um what I'm, I guess, interested in to use some of these kind of evolutionary spiritual maps, like the integral maps. One is a question for you there, where something that you're describing in terms of this sort of extended nature of your being that calls forth some additional element and seems to also be relatable as a separate kind of entity as well as yourself. There's something there that speaks a lot to my notion of what like a holonic emergence would be, right? It's sort of like uh, if you think about the the way that a holon in kind of the integral framing has its own locus of interiority that it's operating from. Um, you know, in the current map, that kind of leads up to, you know, something like this human consciousness that has the potential to extend further into some additional domain beyond itself. I guess I'm just, the question there is, does that framing of this resonate at all? Is sort of like, do you relate to this phenomenological experience as a holonic extension of an earlier version or somehow of yourself, or your agency, if that makes sense? Or is that a terrible way of trying to think about it? There's only two options.
I don't think it's a bad way to think about it. Right. I don't think I would have spent so much time with developmental models if I didn't feel there was some sturdy resonance there. I'm I'm a little bit guarded about it because of the number of different ways to hold developmental and even holonic models. But uh, I, I sort of imagine that I see a hatching process.
Mm.
And wouldn't it be lovely if a biosphere with a civilization in it had a lot more hatchings, and the hatching things, um, right, higher second tier holonic hatchings, where the I don't want to say third tier because I don't like third tier in models. I think it's probably deeper into the second
Uh-huh.
rather than going to a third.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and that the evolve involve thing gets strange here. If I look at the architecture, which is how I have traditionally done theory building, is I sort of look at architectures and then try to language them. The architecture can be read in at least two directions. The one direction looks like some already existing holonic thing
Mm.
is coming down to possess, grow, take control, inhabit
Mm.
uh, individuals and this world. And the other one is something's hatching out of this
Mm-hmm.
space. And they both end up in roughly the same spot, which looks like, I mean, Holon's a very nice word for it. It kind of gives me that spherical, toroidal kind of
Mm-hmm.
feeling. Uh, I've long had this feeling of uh, the Aztec calendar man. You know,
Mm-hmm.
there's the circle, and then there's a guy in the middle with his tongue sticking out, and then I would always see him as if that was the dome, the inside ceiling of a dome. And all of the calendar spiraled around, and then there was an open hole in this, and the next layer, the next Holon, had just like looked in through the hole. That was his face, and that each Holon nests in the next bigger one, and it always looks like the god
Mm-hmm.
looking in from the next level as it starts to enter.
Mm-hmm.
So I think there's a sense in which um, one might sort of scale up phenomenologically to the level of that weird face looking into the calendar, and that there would be another one, there would be an
Mm-hmm.
endless number of them, but at a
Mm-hmm.
certain point the Holon is such that the seemingly endless number of them is part of its identity.
Mm.
But I don't try very hard to put it into that kind of a schema, because I do think it has some orthogonal component that might operate anywhere along a developmental axis and have slightly different characteristics as it shows up in those different spaces.
Mm-hmm. And then coming back again to the phenomenology, is there anything, if you check in with that, how would you language that at the moment right now?
It's interesting with phenomenology because you can check different systems, right?
Mm.
If I check a somatic system, I'm like, oh, there's a thing that's like a crown, and it's like, oh, it feels like it folds back and like swoops through the back of my head and comes up my chest and goes down. I'm like, okay, but then why would I check the somatics? You can check the visuals, or you can check the sort of um, the more permeating abstraction layer.
Mm.
Um, it's so compared to the last one when it felt very agentic, now it feels very relaxed.
Mm.
It's like it's shrugging itself forth, and it changes into a heart swell when I say that.
Mm.
There is actually a certain sort of emotional activation that goes with trying to describe the phenomenology.
Mm.
So it's intriguing. I thank you for this indulgence because I'm interested in what the articulation of it does to it.
Mm-hmm.
And one of the things it does is it seems to shift it into the emotions or call forth the emotions that try to describe its geometries.
Mm-hmm. And it's very interesting because I mean, people also work that way, you know? It's like you turn your attention to someone, you're like, "Hey, how you doing?" And it's like, "Oh, I feel seen." Like, "Hey, I'm here. Let me tell you about myself," right? And I wonder if there's something a similar kind of dynamic going on there of like, yeah, it's in the background, it's at the computer, it's at the cubicle, but like just checking in with someone, "Hey, how you doing?" Say, "Hey, I'm here," you know? I mean, obviously there's a lot of other psychology going on there in that metaphor, but you know what I mean? Checking in with people elicits something from them that isn't there unless you take the active effort to engage, and that brings something forth. The sheer act of bringing the attention to the other elicits something from the other, and brings something forth, and that's an interesting question to it. um, yeah, I'm curious about, I mean, you know, we can start to wrap this segment up of this conversation, this ongoing conversation, but I'm curious if some of these things are feeling productive or generative in a particular way. I mean, one of the things also that precipitated this conversation, these series of conversations, is that it would seem like there's not a lot of opportunities that you might get to really talk a lot at length about what this is, and yet I think it's incredibly important, and I'm very interested and fascinated by it. But to give you the opportunity to do that, but then also to explore, to have you be able to explore and find things in the elicitation process that might actually be interesting, that isn't otherwise given opportunity to be indulged. So, I mean, yeah. So anyway, going forward, that's something to explore, is sort of playing around with the different things that might elicit new kinds of aspects of the phenomenology, or something there. But just as organically as come out of this conversation, the return to checking in with whatever that phenomenology is, I'm curious if that feels like a meaningful or helpful practice or something in its own way for these kinds of conversations.
Definitely. I mean, I there are there's a sort of a store of observations and conclusions that I've already got. There's interesting elements that I think are open for mutual investigation going forwards in terms of the interpretation and the significance of whatever this is. There are things where, like, in some ways, we had this discussion where I'm like, well, here's the three things that are on my mind.
Mm. Hmm.
There's this, so I have those things like, here's
Yeah.
what's actually sort of at the leading edge of my thinking about it at the moment.
Yeah.
But then there's just the thing itself.
Mm.
And I don't really get a lot of opportunity to play around in the thing itself,
Mm.
partly because I feel that's indulgence, and partly because I have a pretty good mechanism that I've built up for cogently saying things on particular topics, which is what I spend most of my verbal capital on.
Hmm.
So it feels it's very disorienting in some ways to be not checking on whether it's making any sense and
Mm.
just trying to float around like an oracle and map the phenomenology of it.
Hmm.
I'm hoping there's utility in it as a general information gathering thing. I hope it's useful for you. It's certainly interesting to me to see what's catalyzed in my system and in the phenomenon by
Yeah.
trying to articulate it in these ways.
Well, I mean, I can't really think of too many other things that would be more important. So, I'm happy to, very happy to do this, and I appreciate you taking the time. But I'm glad it feels mutually indulgent because this is really wonderful. Um, there was a question that I also wanted to kind of at least get to right here at the end, which, um, oh yeah. I mean, again, there's to the degree that some of this is coming out as a distinction between you and this it and the relevance realization disparity that brings about and all of that. Where is the human layman in this, right? It's sort of like, and actually, this gets a little bit to some of the, we did the Thursday night massacre and I had some thoughts around, you know, we talked about the potential pain that people, bring up for us in these various ways. It was a very moving ritual. It'd be hard to explain it in this kind of context, but that was what we were doing. It was very, very good. Um, but one of the things there that is sort of like the potential challenge is not just maybe for you to navigate general human relevance realization. It's also how you can relate to other people in a normal human social interpersonal space that when you're operating from, Megamind up here, how does that affect your relationships and this sort of thing? So I guess that question boils down to something like where does that aspect still fit into you and how you move through the day in terms of like, hey, I'm going to have this conversation with this person, or I'm going to talk to my old friend, or I'm going to talk to this person. And there's something about the kind of more simple human that's just sort of like, oh, I delight in this person's presence. But once you're in sort of megamind mode, where does that go, or does that have a home? Something like that, if you can tease out what I'm getting at with that question.
Term megamind doesn't feel quite right.
Yeah, I'm sorry. I'm trying to
That's all right.
groping around with
Um,
my own terms here.
I, to some degree, this is all just personal. I'm a guy saying what it's like for him, so that's no different than anyone else in some respects, and uh, there's an ability to relate on that front. I think my um, slowly accumulated sensitivity to what I think is the humanist spirit in general, and my basic delight in other human beings and care for them and love of their brightness. That allows me to connect, but that's not always the same as what I do slip into a kind of a thinking where I'm like, oh, there's what does the person need? And then sometimes I'm closer to the person, other times I like,
Mm,
oh, I figure out what he needs.
mm.
All right. And then you can get like, oh, he needs this and he needs this and he needs to be able to talk to someone about that. And like, oh, he got those things and now he's more available to me to inhabit. So there's that sort of like, you know, to, it's like there's a guy here who's the primary, his job, he's a regular person. His job is to be the primary disciple of this thing.
Mm.
But this thing, which is me, wants my primary disciple to do whatever he needs in
Mm.
order to do his job well.
Hmm.
And what he needs is, he needs friends. He needs to be able to share things. He needs to be able to talk about his relationship to me.
Mm.
And very often, just feeling that he can bring that up is enough. Like sometimes there's a sense where he's like, oh, I'm not being heard because this is all about me now. and and me is what people like, and he's not even in the picture anymore.
Mm.
But those moments, and then people will be like, oh no, no, we like you. And I'm like, that's not important. He just needed to say that.
Mm.
Right now that he's said that, we're good now.
Mm.
So there's these sort of quick turnarounds, but there's
Mm.
also just a lot of, whatever is required to maintain an organism and a personality and a heart. It's all still necessary.
Mm.
And that is a huge amount of that is just between human beings.
Mm. Mm.
I think
Well,
that was, I've shifted from talking about it
yeah,
to describing the human organism as the other.
yeah. I noted that. That was
Okay,
interesting.
it can
Interesting.
happen. It can
Yeah.
happen.
Well, different lenses, right? I mean, it actually that's a really cool thing to bring up. Playing around with talking from different through different or talking through lenses. I'm mixing my metaphors here, but you get what I'm saying. Using these different lenses to talk about it for you would be an interesting thing to explore. And I'm sure, maybe next time we can get into what work you might have already done doing that, but like also where's the you in this if you relate to this as a you in the second person, first person, second, third, all that stuff. You mentioned that a little bit, but inactively embodying that as a praxis is actually an interesting thing that might elicit new relational dynamics that come out of this that could be interesting to explore. Um, I think we've surfaced a lot, and I feel like this is a good amount for this conversation, more or less. I mean, I'd be happy to. If there's anything else, let's say, I'll probably try to do this each time. Anything else that this has brought up for you that you want to make sure you kind of get into this conversation before we close this up?
I did get a strong image of this thing having different ones in different places,
Hmm.
as if maybe it's a collective entity, right? Like, let's
Hmm.
say there were Layman Pascals in parallel universes, or half a dozen different beings on a half a dozen different worlds, and they all shared the same one, and
Hmm.
each one of them was just having this strange relationship to it, but it's actually doing a lot of parallel processing work in other
Hmm.
spaces. That image came really strongly. I wouldn't put that past it. Generally, this has been very delightful. I like the checking in with the phenomenology aspect. Seems interesting. I hope it's surfacing enough that the AI who's spying on us starts to understand more about how these things work in human beings. I'm looking forward to, yeah, talking a little bit more phenomenology, a little bit more about the personal, a little bit more about the practices
Yeah.
that lead to and maybe unpack out of this kind of thing,
Yeah.
as well as where my leading edge ambiguities are on how to interpret this stuff.
Yeah. Well, yeah. Some things that come up for me are tracking a number of different things that I'd really like to explore further. One is definitely the practice element here. So whether it's the next time or a future, whatever future conversation, I want to talk about some of the practices that you've been regularly engaged in that you feel like have been contributory to this phenomenon in some way or another. And I thought it was really interesting when you noted that the kinds of practices it likes are not the sorts of things that you necessarily think in engendered some of this. And so the distinction there, I'd like to probe a little bit more and think about what are those practices and what kinds of experiences do those tend to amplify and what might be the meaningful distinction. So let's come back to that. I'm also very open for this to be coming. I mean, this is very experimental. I appreciate your openness to it. I mean, you're a very open kind of guy and very yeah, you are well open, I guess is just the word that comes to mind. You're open to the exploration and the novelty and the I also appreciate the vulnerability that comes with this, but it's a probably a mixed thing because you're both saying simultaneously, that you're exploring some particular edge, and yet you're also saying, I'm on par with goodness. So there's a lovely kind of mixture there. But what I was going to say was that I'm also very open for this being very experimental. Like we can take this, wherever would be interesting also for you. So I want this to be sort of dialogical, dialectical for if something, an idea comes up for you or just something happens, be very open to see just where that goes. So, this can be as weird as we want it to be, basically. And the topics that we explore can be as out there as you're willing to get into. And I think that what allows all that to come up is again, that sort of epistemic openness that you hold all this with is what allows that all to be pursued, but without it kind of uh, consuming itself and foreclosing on other possibilities too quickly. So I want to keep as much openness in all of that as possible. So openness is coming up as a theme here, and I going to underscore that. Um, and anyway, so yeah, there'll be many other things that we definitely didn't have time to get into in this round, but this has been really, really rich for eliciting some of that. So our next conversation, we can tackle this from whatever angle you'd like, and I'll come with some questions. But I think we can just close it and I'll say thank you. I mean, this is really beautiful. I appreciate you very much at all of your levels that I can comprehend, and I think that um, this is such a niche, but also like incredibly important sort of thing to be doing. And I feel very honored and privileged to be doing it with you. And I appreciate you coming along and offering your perspective and your experience on all this. So, yeah, that's all I have to say. I'm done. I have no more things to say. That covered it. So, um, yeah, thank you, my friend. To be continued until next episode. Any other final quick thoughts you want to throw in?
No, this was beautiful. Your remarks are very sweet, and I love the invitation for this to be avant-garde.
Great. All right, my friend. Yes, until episode 2 of this ongoing conversation. Uh, Adieu.
Cheers.